Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth. Let's get into it. When somebody asks for freedom before they offer honesty, pay attention to that order. In this story, the real warning sign is not just cheating. It is the way one partner expects the other to absorb confusion, protect the image, and carry the blame quietly. A useful boundary lesson is this. Once you realize someone wants the benefits of commitment without the duties of truth, stop arguing for your place in their life and start protecting your peace. If you enjoy intense cheating wife revenge stories, marriage betrayal drama, and first-person relationship stories with real consequences, like this video, share with someone who loves powerful storytelling, and subscribe for more stories like this. Now let me tell you how one sentence changed everything. My name is Solomon Reed, and for most of my adult life, I made a living listening for what other people missed. I tuned pianos in black churches, old schools, funeral chapels, and community centers across Baltimore. I could hear when one string pulled a whole chord out of balance. I could hear when a room was warm enough to swell the wood and flatten a note. That kind of work follows you home. So when my wife started sounding different before she ever looked different, I noticed. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough for my chest to tighten when she said my name. Camille and I have been married 9 years, together for 12, and ours used to be the kind of marriage that ran on little rituals more than grand decorations. Saturday mornings, we went to Alma Mae's diner near the bus loop and split cinnamon biscuits with peach preserves. Sunday evening, she watered the plant on the front stoop, while I polished whatever piano keytops I had brought home to finish. She folded bath towels in thirds, never halves. I kept brass screws and felt strips and peppermint tins lined up on a shelf in the basement shop. It was an ordinary life, which was exactly why I loved it. Camille was not loud by nature. She liked clean counters, iron sheets, and those narrow notebooks with cream pages and expensive paper. She worked donor relations for a small arts foundation downtown, and she had a soft, persuasive way of talking that made rich people feel thoughtful and school children feel important. When we first married, she brought herself into a room. She laughed from her stomach. She sat cross-legged on the couch and read out snippets from strange grant applications. Then sometime that spring, she became careful in a new way. Not graceful, guarded, like she had begun rehearsing herself before she stepped into our house. The first thing to go was humming. Camille always hummed while she got ready. Not songs all the way through, just pieces of them, usually old Anita Baker or hymns from her grandmother's church. One Monday in April, I was wrapping a tuning wrench in my grandmother Alberta's handkerchief when I realized the upstairs bathroom had been silent for 3 mornings in a row. That sounds small until you live with somebody long enough to know the soundtrack of their ordinary body. Silence from a person who is usually musical is not peace. Sometimes it is editing. Sometimes it is concentration. Sometimes it is guilt trying not to make any unnecessary noise. The next sign came at Alma Mae's. We were in our usual booth under a framed photograph of the old Pennsylvania Avenue jazz strip, and the waitress with the silver braids had barely set down our coffee before Camille turned her phone face down beside her water glass. She did it so quickly it looked practiced. Then she smiled too brightly and asked about the baby grand I had been restoring for New Mercy Baptist. I answered, but my attention stayed on that phone like it had its own pulse. Midway through breakfast, it buzzed once. Camille didn't even glance at me. She just pressed her hand over it and said, "Work never stops," in a voice that sounded prepared. After that, she began using words that did not belong to us. Lightness, expansion, being seen. Camille had never spoken like a lifestyle podcast. We were grown black folks in Baltimore with mortgages, church obligations, aging parents, and jobs that wanted more than they paid for. We said tired, stressed, grateful, irritated, and hungry. Now she stood in our kitchen slicing strawberries into perfect halves and saying things like, "I think I need more room to breathe in my life." I almost asked what was suffocating her, but I already knew the answer would not be honest. A person telling the truth rarely speaks in slogans. The first physical clue landed in my hand by accident. I was taking her navy trench coat to cleaners because she had left it draped over the dining chair for 3 days, which was unlike her. In the pocket, I found a valet stub from a harbor hotel with a date on it from a Thursday night. She had told me she was at a late board strategy session. On the back, somebody had scribbled in black ink, "Blue looks dangerous on you." No name, no heart, no lipstick, just that sentence, casual in the way only intimate things can be. I stood in our hallway under the radiator hiss and read it 3 times. I could have confronted her that night. God knows I wanted to. But I grew up in a house where accusation was a sport and evidence was optional. My father would come in from work carrying anger like a briefcase, and if my mother was 10 minutes late or looked too tired to answer quickly, he called it betrayal. I promised myself when I became a husband that I would never confuse suspicion with proof. So I slid that valet stub into one of my peppermint tins, closed the lid, and said nothing. I chose silence because I wanted clarity, not drama. That decision cost me sleep, but it kept my hands clean. A week later, I was at the barbershop near Druid Hill, waiting on my cousin Leon to finish a taper, when an older deacon from New Mercy sat down beside me and nodded like he had recognized me from somewhere else first. "Saw Camille downtown last Friday," he said. "I almost called out, but she was moving fast. Thought maybe you two had a date." Night. Brother with her had one of those pocket squares, like he wanted the whole city to notice him. He chuckled and went back to his sports section. I laughed too, because what else do you do when your humiliation arrives wearing church shoes and smelling like talcum powder? That afternoon, I went home and opened the shared account ledger on my laptop. I was not proud of the steadiness in my hands. It felt less like panic and more like a man checking weather before boarding up windows. Camille and I kept separate personal accounts, but one household account for bills, groceries, and large purchases. There they were: valet parking, a restaurant in Harbor East we had never visited together, flowers from a boutique florist, ride-share charges on nights she claimed she was staying late for donor dinners. Nothing obscene, nothing cinematic, just enough small lies stitched together to make a whole other life. My second big decision came sitting at that same dining table. I could have emptied the shared account down to the penny. Plenty of people would have called that justice. Instead, I transferred exactly half into a new account in my name and left the rest untouched except for the mortgage and utilities. I printed statements. I labeled folders. I made coffee so strong it tasted like punishment. I chose precision because rage is expensive and I had no intention of paying for my own collapse. When betrayal hits, the wildest thing you can do is stay methodical. It feels unnatural. It is also how you survive without becoming unrecognizable to yourself. Patrice Cole had gone to Morgan with my sister, and now ran a family law practice above a tax office and a beauty supply store. She wore square glasses, pearl studs, and the kind of patience that can make panic sit down. I brought her the valet stub, the statements, and the story as cleanly as I could tell it. She listened without interrupting, then asked 3 questions. Was the row house inherited? Yes, from my aunt before our marriage. Were there children? No. Did I want reconciliation or truth? I almost said both, then heard how foolish that sounded. Truth, I said. Patrice nodded like we could work with that. She told me not to grandstand, not to threaten, not to do anything clever that a judge would later call retaliatory. She also told me to stop pretending this might drift back into place on its own. Get your copies in order, she said. Secure your business income. Change nothing she can call punitive before she is informed. But be ready. There was comfort in her bluntness. On the way home, I stopped at a corner store for ginger ale and peanuts, then sat in my van for 10 minutes watching a city bus kneel at the curb and thinking how strange it is that heartbreak still expects you to buy groceries. The man's name reached me by way of a gala invitation. Camille left on the sideboard under a bowl of lemons. Vaughn Mercer, donor, developer, host committee member. Camille had mentioned him before in that polished professional tone she used for people who wrote checks large enough to alter her week. Vaughn gets things done. Vaughn knows everybody. Vaughn understands how to make people feel valued. His picture online showed a handsome black man in his 40s with close-cut hair, heavy watch, and an easy smile. Married, too. A feature in a local magazine had him standing beside his wife, Adrian, at a school fundraiser. I stared at that photograph longer than I needed to. The moment certainly arrived. It did not arrive elegantly. I had spent a Wednesday afternoon at a downtown hotel, tuning a baby grand before a medical fundraiser. The ballroom smelled like lemon polish and chilled air. I was rolling my tool case toward the freight elevator when the main elevator doors opened across the lobby, and Camille stepped out laughing with Vaughn Mercer. She wore the blue dress from that note. He touched the middle of her back like he had done it many times before, guiding her toward the concierge desk. She was looking up at him with a face I recognized and did not recognize at all. Neither of them saw me. I could have crossed that marble floor and blown up both their lives right there between the flower arrangements and the brass luggage carts. For 3 full seconds I pictured it. His startled face. Her mouth dropped open. Security walking over. My voice rang through that polished room. Instead, I turned my body sideways behind a pillar and took one photograph of my phone. Then I kept walking. I chose not to confront them because I was still on a work contract, because public humiliation was not the same as justice, and because I had begun to understand something ugly. The moment of exposure often feels better to the innocent spouse than the consequences that follow. I wanted consequences. That night, Camille came home carrying candied pecans from a donor basket and talking about long speeches and dry salmon. I stood at the counter dicing onions for red beans and rice, smelling hotel polish on her coat, and hearing Vaughn's laugh under hers like an echo. She kissed my cheek. I almost dropped the knife. "You all right?" she asked. I said, "Long day," which was true. Shame moved through me in layers. Shame that I still wanted to believe her. Shame that I had watched and said nothing. Shame that a woman I loved had become somebody I now measured in statements, photographs, and a new angle of her smile. My sister Lenora came by that weekend with her choir folder and 2 slices of coconut cake wrapped in foil. Lenora was the kind of woman who could bless a child, bury an Annie, and cuss out a contractor in the same afternoon without changing earrings. We sat on my front steps while Mr. Jenkins across the street swept pollen into little golden drifts. I told her more than I had told anybody except Patrice. Lenora listened, then said, "The dangerous thing right now is not her affair. It is you still protecting the image of your marriage like it is wholly all by itself." She looked hard at me. Truth does not ruin what lies have already broken. After that, I started noticing how often Camille floated ideas that sounded like test balloons. "Do you ever think people can outgrow a life without anybody doing anything terrible?" she asked one night, while moisturizing her hands in bed. Another evening, she stood in the doorway of my basement shop, looking at the old upright I was rebuilding, and said, "Some things are beautiful and still too heavy to keep moving around." I knew she was not talking about the piano. She wanted to say something and still be thought well of. That is a very human desire. It is also where a lot of cowardice dresses itself up as maturity. The home tablet sealed it. We used one old tablet mostly for recipes, weather, and video calls with my mother. Camille had forgotten she was logged into her email there. I was looking up a peach cobbler crust ratio when a preview flashed across the top of the screen. Last night was worth every lie. That was it. Nobody paragraph. No explanation. Just the kind of sentence that assumes it is arriving where it is welcome. I did not open it. I did not need to. I took a picture of the screen with my phone and powered the tablet down. Enough is enough when your body says enough before your pride does. Patrice drafted the papers on a Monday. The row house was mine by inheritance. My piano business was mine. Our joint savings would be divided evenly. Camille could keep her car, her retirement, her personal accounts, and the furniture she had bought before we married if she wanted it. Patrice also told me to line up the practical side in advance, so confrontation did not turn into negotiation by exhaustion. I changed my direct deposit for business invoices. I copied tax records. I arranged for the locks to be rekeyed after Camille moved out. I called Tasha, Camille's older sister, and asked one question. "If things break tonight, can she stay with you?" Tasha went quiet, then said yes. I hated myself for how calm I became once there was a plan. Calm can feel like strength, but sometimes it is grief putting on a suit. I spent that Tuesday tuning the Baldwin upright that had belonged to my grandmother Alberta. Its walnut case still carried a faint scent of the lavender sachets she kept inside the bench. I replaced 2 worn hammers, polished the brass pedals, and listened to the notes bloom into alignment one by one. Every family has one object that outlives the people who touch it. In ours, it was that piano. I remember thinking that it would wire and felt could be restored after decades of neglect. A man ought to be able to restore himself too. Camille came home just after 7 with a bakery box in her hand, and that distant, polished expression she wore when she'd been somewhere emotionally expensive. Rain had started, making the row house windows glow with reflections from the streetlights. I had already made turkey meatloaf, collards, and mashed sweet potatoes. The table was set, not romantically, properly. She looked around like she was trying to read what version of the evening she had stepped into. "You cooked all this on a Tuesday?" she asked. "It felt like being home," I said. She set the box down. "We need to talk after dinner." I said, "I know." She barely touched her food. I noticed because I had spent years learning the language of her appetites. Usually she ate collards first and saved the potatoes for last. That night she kept smoothing her napkin over her knees and glancing at the rain on the window. Finally she put down her fork and said very softly, "Solomon, I do not know how to say this in a way that does not hurt you." I folded my hands in my lap and waited. She swallowed once. "I need freedom from this marriage." She said it like she expected the sentence to land with dignity, as if it had arrived there clean. I did not ask for freedom. I did not ask from whom. I did not give her the argument she had probably rehearsed in her car. I just nodded once and said, "Good. Pack fast. Tonight it begins." For the first time in months, Camille looked honestly startled. "What?" she said. I stood up, went to the sideboard, and brought back the folder Patrice had prepared along with my own copies of the statements, the photograph in the hotel, and the image of that email preview on the tablet. I set everything beside her untouched plate. "You asked for freedom," I said. "I am done financing your dishonesty while you practice the speech." She stared at the photograph first, then the statements, then the screenshot. Her face changed in stages, not all at once. Confusion, then fear, then the wild mental arithmetic of somebody realizing the timeline in their head has collapsed. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "Long enough to stop believing in coincidence," I said. "Not long enough to stop loving who I thought you were." She covered her mouth with both hands and began to cry immediately. But even then I noticed the old instinct still at work in her. She cried before she spoke, perhaps hoping the tears would soften the facts. They did not. "It is not what you think," she said, which would have been almost funny if my body had still been built for laughter. I slid the hotel photo closer to her. "That line is tired, Camille." She shook her head hard. "I was going to tell you." "No," I said. "You were going to manage me. There's a difference." She tried again. "Von made me feel." I put my hand up. "Do not insult me with a commercial. I know exactly what he made you feel. Wanted. New. Risky. Watched. I am not confused about the appeal. I am clear about the deceit." Her crying changed after that. Less performance. More panic. Then I told her what "Tonight it begins" meant. Tasha was on her way. Half the household funds were already separated, fairly. Patrice had filed the first paperwork and would serve the rest in the morning. Camille was no longer authorized on my business card. She could take clothes, toiletries, her laptop, her personal keepsakes, and the armchair her grandmother had given us. The house would remain civil, but it would not remain shared. You do not get to ask for freedom while sleeping under the roof of the man you've been betraying. I said, "You wanted a new life. Tonight is your first honest night in it." She reached for my hand, and I pulled it back before she touched me. That small movement seemed to wound her more than anything else. "Please," she said, "please do not do this like this." I almost asked how she would have preferred it. Slowly? Kindly? With me thanking her for the clarity? Instead, I told the truth. I could have screamed. I could have cursed you out in that hotel lobby. I could have called your mother, your pastor, and every board member you know. I did none of that. I am doing this calmly, because calm is all that is left of my respect. She looked at me like that sentence had finally stripped the room bare. There was one more thing. I told her I would not let her rewrite the story and leave me holding the embarrassment. Before you walk out that door, I said, you are calling your mother and telling her the truth. Not a version. Not we grew apart. The truth. Camille stared at me like I had become cruel in a language she did not speak. Maybe I had. But I had also learned that when a marriage breaks under cheating, the loyal spouse often ends up carrying the social awkwardness while the cheater tries to preserve reputation. I was done donating my silence to her comfort. Some bills arrived late. They are still due. Tasha arrived 20 minutes later in a raincoat and soft house shoes, because that is how black women and families show up for disasters. Practical first, emotional second. Camille had packed one suitcase by then, and was sitting on the edge of the couch like somebody waiting for a verdict she already understood. Tasha took one look at the folder and did not ask me for details. She just said, Camille, call Mama. The call was awful. Camille cried. Her mother cried harder. I stood in the kitchen by the sink and listened to rain tap the back steps while a truth I had been carrying alone finally became shared weight. Before Camille left, she turned to the door and said, Did you tell his wife? I said, Not yet. That seemed to give her some thin strand of hope. Please don't, she said. That has nothing to do with us. I looked at her and understood, in a clean, terrible flash, that selfishness never sounds more sincere than when consequences spread beyond the person who chose them. Adrian has everything to do with this, I said. She is living inside the same lie I was. Camille started crying again, but I was beyond being moved by tears that only arrived after exposure. Tasha led her out into the rain. I did not sleep much that night. I sat at the dining table under the weak yellow light and wrote Adrian Mercer a short letter by hand. No performance, no insults, no gory detail, just facts, dates, and copies of what I had. I included my phone number in case she wanted to verify anything. Then I placed the packet in a large envelope and sent it certified the next morning from the post office near Mondawmin. I chose that route instead of social media, workplace gossip, or anonymous revenge because innocents deserve information, not spectacle. Hurt people are often tempted to become theatrical. I was tempted too. I refused. The fallout did not come like thunder. It came like water under a door. Quiet at first, then everywhere. Adrian called 3 days later. Her voice was steady in the way voices get when tears have already done their work. She thanked me for telling her plainly. I apologized that we were meeting this way. She said, Do not apologize for being the only honest person in this mess. We spoke for 9 minutes. No friendship, no alliance, just two black adults standing in the rubble of other people's choices and refusing to decorate it with false niceness. When the call ended, I sat on my basement steps and let myself shake. Camille moved from Tasha's sofa to a short-term apartment on the county line. Patrice handled communication after that. In mediation, Camille cried twice, asked for the row house once, then backed off when Patrice laid out the inheritance paperwork. To her credit, or maybe just to her realism, she did not drag the process into a war. She kept her car and retired. I kept the house and my business. We split the savings. Nobody left rich. Nobody left. That is the thing about divorce after betrayal. People imagine winners and losers, but most days it feels more like two people paying different prices for the same fire. Her job did not survive the summer. I had nothing to do with that directly, and I kept it that way. But donor circles are small, arts boards are vain, and affairs attached to fundraising work tend to rot confidence quickly. Vaughn Mercer stepped away from the foundation board for personal reasons. Camille was put on leave, then quietly resigned before they could push harder. Tasha told Lenora, who told me, because families pass information even when they promise not to. When I heard, I felt no thrill, just a dull confirmation that lies rarely stay in the lane where you first put them. They leak into every room that trusts you. Church was the hardest part. New Mercy was not a gossip factory, but black church people can smell fracture the way mechanics smell antifreeze. For 2 Sundays, I sat alone near the side aisle and felt eyes slide toward me, then away. Finally, one of the mothers asked if Camille was visiting relatives. I could have said yes. I could have protected her still. Instead, I said quietly, "We are divorcing because she was unfaithful, and I would appreciate your prayers without speculation." The mother squeezed my arm and nodded. That was it. No scene. No sermon. Truth, once spoken plainly, often needs less maintenance than a lie. By October, the house had begun to sound like mine again. The radiator knocks in the front room. The scrape of my work boots on the basement stairs. The soft click of peppermint tins opening and closing while I sorted piano pins by size. I started cooking for myself without resentment. Catfish on Fridays. Turkey chili on cold nights. Sweet potato biscuits on Sundays, though they never rose as tall as my aunt's. I finished my grandmother's Baldwin and donated it to a youth music program on the West Side, watching teenagers crowd around that old upright, tapping out chords and laughing off-key, did more for me than any speech about healing ever could. Camille came to the house in November just before dusk, wearing a wool coat I had given her for our 5th anniversary, and looking smaller inside it. I opened the door, but did not invite her in. She said Vaughn had gone back to his wife for public appearances, and then moved out anyway. She said she had been seeing a therapist. She said she knew now that she had confused being admired with being loved. All of that may have been true. I listened because listening is my habit. But when she asked whether there was any road back for us, I answered immediately, "No, there is not." Sometimes mercy is clarity. She stood on my stoop with tears shining in the porch light and said a line I suppose every person in her position reaches for eventually. "I made a mistake." I said, "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary dinner or denting a bumper in the rain. What you did was a chain of decisions you protected over and over." She closed her eyes like the words hit physically. I did not raise my voice. I did not enjoy it. I just refused to hand her a softer definition of what she had done. When she finally walked back to her car, the block was quiet except for a bus exhaling at the corner. I locked the door and went downstairs to tune a stubborn middle C. What stayed with me in this story is not the affair partner, and not even the line about freedom. It is the moment Solomon refused to carry Camille's edited version of events. From the call to her mother to the note, he sent Adrian without spectacle. Boundaries are not revenge because they are loud. They matter because they are clean. Once trust has been mocked, as it was at that kitchen table and on that hotel floor, grief may still be necessary, but confusion is not. Accountability begins where image management ends. If this relationship drama story hit hard, like, share, and subscribe for more original first-person cheating, betrayal, and revenge stories with emotional twists and real consequences. And if you stayed until the end, comment "Freedom has a price," so I know you were here for full story. The end.